Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are talking about the Los Angeles Clippers and how the Clippers are going to have to approach the start of the season, given some of the news that they have gotten this off season. So, the first bit of news is something you probably already know about. Obviously, the Clippers lost Paul George in the offseason. He went to Philadelphia as a free agent. The other bit of news came slightly more recently. The team announced that Kawhi Leonard had complications with, previous or pre-existing injuries. He would miss the start of the season, and he is set to be out indefinitely for the Clippers. So, not good news to be getting as a team with the start of the season basically right on top of us. So the question is, what do the Clippers do? What do the Clippers look like now going into the start of the 2024-2025 campaign? Well, on the offensive side of the ball, at least, there is a relatively straightforward path for the Clippers, and that is to lean heavily on the last remaining star player that they have on their roster, which is James Harden. Harden effectively becomes the number one option for the Clippers. Now, looking at his stats from last season, he did sort of take a step back, moved into a slightly smaller role than he had been used to on previous teams, and the numbers sort of reflect that, right? Last season, he averaged 16.6 points. That is well below his career average of 24.1. It's actually his lowest scoring season since 2012, I believe, which was his third season in the league. A similar sort of step backwards for his assist numbers, his stats as a playmaker. Averaged 8.5 assists last season. That is down from the league-leading 10.7 assists that he had in the 22-23 campaign. But still the highest assist count or assist average on the Clippers, and still pretty impressive to be getting 8.5 per game. So yes, Harden's stats took a step back last season, but he was playing, the third option behind both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard when they were all healthy. So in that regard, it makes sense that his numbers regressed a little bit, and in theory, with Paul George gone and Kawhi Leonard on the sidelines with his injury, Harden should bump those numbers back up, being the number one offensive option for the Clippers. We've seen it before. His time in Houston, especially, where he's just the guy who can kind of fuel the team. Not quite all by himself, but pretty close. And that kind of brings us to the second point here, because Harden can do a whole lot by himself, but he can't really truly carry the team without any help whatsoever. The Clippers do need contributions from elsewhere in the lineup. So the question is, who are the guys who step up? And in that regard, you have two primary options. You're looking at either some of the new guys that they brought in this offseason, or some of the secondary or tertiary role players on the existing roster who now have the chance to get more opportunities with Leonard and George gone. The two primary candidates there are Ivica Zubac and Norman Powell. Between those two guys, I would probably say Powell is the most likely person of the two to become a stronger offensive option. Zubac has been very consistent with the Clippers since going to not to LA. He was already in LA with the Lakers, but moving to the other Los Angeles team. He's averaged 10 points and 8.4 rebounds on 62.8% field goal shooting across 6 seasons with the Clippers. However, he's never averaged more than 12 points. They don't really seem to run set plays for him specifically. He's kind of a take what the defense gives you kind of player, and I don't really see that leading to a massive explosion in his scoring output. For Powell, though, it's a slightly different story, right? He's averaged 15.5 points on 48.3% shooting since joining the Clippers. Last season was actually the first time that he had averaged fewer than 16 points since 2020. So he's kind of more used to being a second or third scoring option for teams. So obviously last year that was a little bit down because he moved into a smaller role, but no Paul George, no Kawhi Leonard, at least temporarily. Powell could be maybe that second option behind Harden and get his scoring back up to where it has been the last couple of years. Now, if one of those two guys who are holdovers from last season's roster don't make it happen, then there is hope for one of their newly acquired sort of free agents or trade options to do something for them. Three guys in particular that were sort of slightly bigger names that they brought in: Chris Dunn, Derrick Jones Jr., and Kevin Porter Jr. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to take two of those guys off the list. Chris Dunn has been pretty much a career backup point guard. Hasn't really put up the stats to confidently project him as a team's number 2 scoring option. Derrick Jones Jr., a very similar position, right? Energy, defense potentially, but his scoring has never, I believe, been higher than double digits at any point in his career so far. So they're not likely to be those sort of offensive workhorses for the Clippers. Porter Jr., though, could be that guy for them, right? He was looking like a pretty high scoring option in Houston through the first couple of years of his career. He averaged 17.2 points, 6 assists, and 4.7 rebounds on 42.8% shooting from the field in 3 seasons with the Rockets. Now, the reason that you haven't heard of him in a little while is because he spent the last season playing overseas after getting into a pretty serious bit of off-court issues legally. So I don't want to go too in-depth with that, but he messed up pretty massively, and it cost him his initial shot in the NBA. The Clippers have decided to give him a second chance, and at least in terms of on-court performance, he is someone who could help them. He has obviously a lot of stuff still to work out off the court, but the hope for the Clippers is that he can sort himself out with his off-court issues and be a consistent contributor on the court. Now, even with all that said, if one of those guys, Powell, Zubac, Porter Jr., steps up and becomes that sort of second guy next to Harden for the Clippers until Kawhi Leonard returns, you're still going to be looking at a scenario where the Clippers bench is under a lot of pressure this year, right? That's what happens when you lose 2 all-star players from last year's lineup and you suddenly have to sort of scramble to readjust your rotations. Now, last season, the Clippers bench was a pretty solid one for the most part. They were 9th in terms of bench points, but again, Kawhi's gone, Paul George is gone. Last year's rotations are not going to look exactly like this year's rotations, and quite frankly, some of those guys who contributed to that bench production last year might end up having to play starting roles, at least at the start of this season, to sort of fill in the gaps. So a lot more pressure on that second unit for the Clippers. I don't think they're going to completely sort of bottom out there, but a top 10 bench unit is probably not going to happen with the adjustments that they have to make, at least through the first maybe month or two of the campaign. Now, there is another concern for the Clippers, because everything I was just talking about here was all about just maintaining the team's offensive profile, right? We have talked nothing about how the defense is going to work here for the Clippers, which is a problem because the Clippers were not the best defensive team last year. I say this often sort of as a caveat when I talk about these teams. They weren't terrible. They were not a bad defense, quote unquote, but they weren't good either, right? 17th in the league in defensive rating. They were 10th in points allowed as a defense. But if you take a look at their numbers in terms of their shooting defense, they were at or around league average across really most of these categories. 15th in field goals allowed, 16th in field goal attempts allowed, 12th in field goal percentage against, 14th in three-pointers allowed, 15th in three-point attempts allowed, and 14th in three-point percentage. So you're hovering around, 15th, 14th. That is league average. But how does that hold up now, right? You've lost a couple of big names. You are trying to sort of get your rotation sorted out. You're trying to figure out where some of these new guys you've brought in are going to fit. Does that take a toll on the defense? 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. So a team that was already kind of struggling to break out from the middle of the pack defensively is going to have some issues to deal with, all while already trying to fix potential issues on the offensive side of the ball. So overall, the Clippers have enough questions in the aftermath of the Kawhi Leonard injury news to be pretty confident in lowering their projections, right? It's pretty easy to now be less confident in the Clippers, but I don't think that the bottom sort of falls out, the wheels come off entirely for the Clippers. I think that with Harden as the number one option, plus whoever it is that steps up to be number two, right? Zubats, Powell, Porter, anyone, they're likely to avoid dropping completely, right? I don't think they're going to be in the bottom 3 to 5 teams in the Western Conference. I can't see them really much higher than maybe 7 to 10 for the first couple of months of the season while they wait for Kawhi to return, but they could find something, right? Somewhere in here could be the recipe for success, but considering how strong the rest of the Western Conference is, it does seem far more likely that they simply struggle and sit, maybe towards the 7 to 10 isn't really even middle of the pack, but that kind of area, right? Where they're not quite out of the playoff picture, but they're not really contenders either through the first couple of months. But really, that's all I got. Let me know what you think. Do you believe that James Harden can go back to being the number one option, right? He's a couple of years older than he was during his time in Houston. Do you believe he can just sort of bounce back into being the guy for a team like that? Who do you think is the person who steps up for the Clippers? Is it one of the guys I named? Is it Zubats? Is it Powell? Is it Kevin Porter Jr.? Or is it someone else on their roster who I didn't really touch on in this video? And do you think that the Clippers are better or worse as a defensive unit compared to what we saw last season? But like I said, a lot of questions for the Clippers. We're going to get answers in the near future, but it's a bit of a rough time for LA. But that's all I got. So please feel free to let me know what you think. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.